I feel like after Prop 8 passed, I had an inner narrative and an outer narrative.
Okay.
And it was interesting. I mean, the morning after it passed, Sandy and I and the kids had spent the night at the hotel venue where the campaign was hoping to celebrate defeating Prop 8. And it was I finally made it back up to the hotel room by about 2, and it was clear that we lost. And I think Sandy and I both laid in bed completely awake and not saying a word. I finally got up at 6, showered, and when I came out, she'd ordered breakfast for the kids, and it was clear she told them because they both looked at me, sort of sad faces, and I said, and I think Julian, our son, said, "I'm sorry, Mom." And I was bound and determined I wasn't going to cry in front of them, and I said, I know, it's, I said, "Thank you, son. It's, I'm sad, but we're going to be okay. Our family is okay. Mommy and I are still married. We're going to be fine." And Ariana gave me a hug. She was only, I think, 6 at the time. And Julian gave me a hug, and he said, "That's right, Mom, and you just have to keep on going." And keep on fighting. You just have to keep on fighting. And so that was the outer narrative that I definitely projected, that look, yeah, this is terrible, but we're gonna get through this. This was like the trajectory of every civil rights movement. We got the shit kicked out of us, and we got to get back up and fight on.
Commonwealth Travel Club, they're on Market Street. They've been there for a century. But in 2006, there's a group of travelers, they call themselves, the organization of ethical travelers. What they do is, they do the investigation, their homework, so to speak, to see if they are stable country. So the first year was in 2012. From 75 countries around the world, Cabo Verde came in top 10. The second year is in 2013. And in 2013, around 40 countries, we come again in the top 10. But in 2014, we come in number 1. We won 3 years in a row.
There was a general concern about what would happen to civil liberties, and that spring, whether free speech would be curbed or in what degree. So some of us, I got the idea of trying to have a forum, a forum at Cal on this, and this led me to propose to the Associated Students Executive Committee, hey, we want to do we want to have a Hyde Park type forum on one of the campus lawns at noontime, when students in the good weather many of them would take their lunches on the lawn, and what somebody later dubbed Town Hall of the Lawns came into being. The ASUC was willing to put up a few dollars for us to get a little sound system that could focus, that would be not general, but would focus on a given parcel of land. And we had this fine stretch of land below the Campanile, across from South Hall, across from Stevens Union. I wound up doing about 2 programs a week on current issues, and I would get speakers on both sides of the issue, and we would have at it.
We had a visitor in the history department in 1968 named Natalie Zeman Davis, and she was a very political person, and she said, you ought to form a faculty women's group and start doing something about this. And she was a believer in activism. And so that's when we started the women's faculty group, and some time later it was changed to be called the Association of Academic Women. So we get a lot of contact between the Association of Academic Women and the chancellors and various things that we did. Now, you have to remember that the period of the 50s and 60s was very political activist period. I mean, all the stuff was happening about affirmative action in the South and so on. And we kept signing petitions and marching and so on. I went on marches. I remember taking my children in strollers on marches. And so there was a lot of political expression going on then.
I came up with the idea, I think it was my idea, who knows? People tell me it was my idea, but I mean, it grew out of a number of discussions that said, why don't we get the kids together and put on a show? I call it the Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland moment, where we said, well, we got these old streetcars, they're running on market now, we'll need some more. But, there was enough track was in place to run the kind of roundabout route up to the Castro district. Because the tracks on Market itself had been taken out from DuBose to Castro when they built the subway underneath, because they just opened the street. It was called cut and cover construction.
Last year, Gabe asked me to talk to the Spur interns. I mean, there are now, I don't know, 15 or 20 interns working here, as well as a staff of 20 or something, and plus Oakland and San Jose. And so I kind of talked to these interns about the history of Spur and how it's changed over the years and what it's done. And the last question, one of the young interns said, which great thinker on organizational policy do you subscribe to? Do you think this, or do you think the, And I said, I don't have any idea. I've never read those guys. I'm just a poor, dumb planner, but I know how to get things done.
The apartment house that we lived in had an entryway, and then there were 4 apartments underneath, and then there were 3 floors with 4 apartments per floor. Then there was it was kind of a slummy backyard, and then there was a coal-burning furnace down below. People ask me how I got into natural history, and how somebody from a neighborhood like this got into natural history. I once did a Yiddish natural history, and there were 2 kinds of birds. There were fagels and fagela, big birds, pigeons and sparrows. And the sparrows were the fagela, the little birds. And my mother would look out and she'd see the little birds were going bovis, which was the word for barefoot. And my mother worried about their little feet being cold. So she would make them a shissel was a saucepan, a shissel of milk with some good Jewish bread. And she'd heat it up, and she'd throw it out of the window into the backyard. And it would hit the snow, and it would, because it was hot, it would burrow down into the snow, into a hole. And the little birds would come and look down into the hole with their eyes. And there was this hot bread steaming away down in a well of snow that they couldn't get to. And the whole thing was, on one hand, so ridiculous, but it was so filled with love. It was so filled with something you never get from other natural histories, was this knowledge that birds and us are the same creatures, that they love good Jewish bread, that they shouldn't go barefoot in the snow.
Amelia, that runs she's the publisher of the Sun Reporter newspaper. When I had made up my mind I wanted to run for chief, I called her and I said, Amelia, I said, I have somebody that's interested in being the next chief of the department. I said, I wonder if I can get you to support him. And she said, who? Kind of like, who is Bob going to come up with, you know? I said, oh, some guy named Bob Dimmers. So she said, oh, I'm going to put that in the paper. So she put it in the Sun Reporter, and my picture said I was seeking to be the chief. We all know that Chief Medina didn't want to stay on. And so I went in a staff meeting, right back. And so Frank Scales, one I was telling you about, he had brought the Sun Reporter in there. So I was the last one to go into the staff meeting other than Chief Medina. So they were all sitting around the table. So my boss, who was the Deputy Chief of Administration, had the article, the newspaper, in front of him. So when I walked in, obviously they had been talking about it. And so I walked in, he says, Bob, I see you want to be chief. I said, yeah, somebody have to run this damn department.
The Reynolds would run about 300 gallon a minute in the wintertime or 9 months of the year, but during snowmelt, it'd go to 1,000. The pH of the water coming out of the Reynolds tunnel would be about 2.3.
Whoa.
7's neutral.
That's sulfuric acid is
just bottle it. You could bottle the sulfuric acid. Yeah, it was when it was running 300 gallon a minute year the 9 months of the year. When it was running 1,000 gallon a minute, it was still about 2.3 or 2.4. So it was flushing the old underground workings, which had been sitting there for 100 years, dissolving or decomposing.
Yeah.
And it was just flushing that on out into the Animas River. But they put this sludge on top. Well, that sludge was soluble material. So you got all acid generating material all in one place in the bottom of the Summitville pit.
And they thought they could just bury it.
They buried it to this day.
Crocodiles. Basically, how does a crocodile keep its rump underwater and keep it from getting sunburned? They pick up stones. In the modern context, they'll pick up rebar, pieces of brick. These are held in the stomach and serve as ballast. So if you've got crocodiles in your deposit, you begin to wonder, was this something that a croc picked up and happened to die and redeposit it? There used to be a beautiful exhibit in the Natural History Museum in London. May still be there, but it showed what the contents of a Nile crocodile's stomach, and bone and rock and a little pile of blue beads. And with typical British, what shall we say, approach, a little sign saying, "It is not known whether these were worn when ingested."
By engaging the kids, you engage the parents. And the parents provide a huge amount of support for the Park District. Now, that wasn't my principal reason for doing it, but it was certainly a nice offshoot, you know. So I figured if we started the kids even earlier, and it's mostly because I wanted to work with these young kids. And it's interesting because as these kids who were 3- and 4-year-olds, that was the age limit for ours, as they got older, they wanted us to continue doing more programs for their older kids. So I started the Tilden Explorers, and that went from age 5 to 7. You know. And then at the time, Junior Rangers actually started at 8, and so that'd go from 8 to 13. And then we started the Junior Ranger Aid program, and that went from like 13 until they went off to college, basically. So it suddenly, not suddenly, but it just sort of slowly dawned on us that we needed to have a continuous route, you know, to kind of, not so much train these kids, but just get them involved, you know, get them invested in the environment and the park district.
We began to resist, and I ran for union office, got involved in the union. We began to develop an outreach of the union into the community where we were helpful to them because we were pointing out these chemicals and we were working to get rid of them. Well, the people who live in Berkeley liked that idea. They liked the fact that we were being environmentally conscious, and that was just beginning to break here, you know, the idea of doing something about the environment. Or we do like we did with the step by step, the longest march can be done, many stones to build an arch, singly none, and by union what we will can be accomplished still, drops of water turn the mill, singly none. And we came walking out of the woods with our shovels over our shoulders. We had those 3/4 shovels,
Yeah.
and the kids were, you know, swaggering, and they'd come down there and their parents would be waiting for them, and here they'd come marching across the meadow singing Union songs. And I never got called on that. Of course, I'd picked the audience pretty well. You know. Berkeley is a pretty good Union town.
There are no words. There's not any words of the song. So I'm not really, you know, I'm playing the tune, but it's an arrangement. It's not really the tune.
Okay.
Strictly.
Oh, I see. It's a variation.
Now, all the time when I'm playing this stuff, I have to make certain adaptations because I have to follow Charlie's words. Sorry. Like this part, this is all because David said, oh, this should be a little choppier. Because of Charlie's words, they would take things slowly. They would accompany each other to plays, or I can't remember the words. Ben wouldn't object to that. But see, certain words I have like that because I know, okay, Ben wouldn't object to that. That's when it's the end of the thing. So I would have to adapt.
It's a letter that I wrote to myself. It's dated December 8th, 1941. What is the meaning of war? Bloodshed, death, and destruction. They seem so far away. Have you ever been through a war? I haven't. I can't conceive of hundreds of people, men and women, being killed, their lives ended just because one or two men up in the sky release a bomb. I can't imagine the horror that they must be in with the sound of the air raid warnings, a warning that means the possibility of your death. I can't help but wonder why it is possible for one or two men to give the signal which will put other men to death.
I made sure I had a full tank of gas on that little, and being that I was getting $50 a month from the government, I knew that was sure. Okay. So I would save enough so that I'd have money to go to Los Angeles or Fresno, but I didn't have any money to pay for my room. So I would park my car in Safeway's parking lot, lock the doors, and that's where I would sleep. Once I went to visit him, and then I thought it's time I head back and find a little parking. Then I would park my car in the parking lot and lock my windows. He'd bring me an apple or a peach, and I would eat that, and that was the food that I had. I didn't have money to buy food enough because I had to save for the gas to come back.
In New Orleans, you know, we had, even in high school, my school was situated on Rampart Street, and my principal would stand on a corner because the red light district was to the right. So he would make us go the other way to get home, you know. So, and we had friends in our class that lived in the French Quarter, and they could pass. So they're blondes, brunettes, and everything else. So when we get on the streetcar, they would have the sign where you only have about 2 seats left, and all the other seats are empty. Those girls would go up there and take a seat. They pass for white. In fact, there was one girl in our machine shop. She looked like a white girl, and she would say, she's working at, we call them dime, 5 and 10 cent stores at that time. And she said she was invited to the White's house. They thought she was white. And she said all they talked about was the blacks. And she says, and here she was listening to all this, and she was black too. But she said she had to go along with it, you know. But she says it's really, because we hadn't experienced anything, she would tell us all about this stuff that she was experiencing for passing and everything. So, and got a chance to work at the dime store where we couldn't work there. You put in an application, but it was thrown in the garbage.
Were the wage rate analysts primarily women?
Yes, I think there were maybe one man, probably a 4F, I would guess. Otherwise, we were all women.
And mainly college educated for this wage rate?
Yes. We were all at about the same level.
And age, about the same age? Or?
Yes.
So you kind of relatively young women are going out to the businessmen in the community.
Yes, we
and
were.
telling them how much they could pay their workers.
Yes,
How did that
yes, we were.
work?
They had to listen to us. You know, it really, there was no way out. We were in control.
And you did a lot of water with the Knight Brown project.
Now that was major, because it was Brown who set up the whole California water project in 1958. We had to discuss all of that with Governor Brown. I interviewed Brown twice. The first time he came to my room in the motel.
Oh.
He was there and he said, well, we went through a lot there, and then he kept saying, I am so tired. He said, last night, I think it was my birthday, I celebrated my birthday and I was up late and I'm just so tired. He said, and I said to him, you can't go to sleep now, or something like this, Governor Brown. We just have to finish this. We have to do this interview. And I never thought much about it, except that whoever was doing the transcribing just found this very interesting.
And funny.
And funny. How could you say this to the governor?